Yeah. Yeah. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we are talking at 3:42 a.m. about Loki episode 5. I just watched Black Widow 2 as well tonight, and that kind of delayed my normal schedule of making these videos. And Black Widow was good and all. It was fine. But my god, this episode of Loki was everything that I wanted this show to be, and not even anything close to what I expected it to be, because this show has been completely out there bonkers insane like I wanted WandaVision to be, which WandaVision was. It was insane and bonkers on a TV scale because it was WandaVision. It was a TV show riff, essentially. This show is equally as, or maybe even more so, bonkers and crazy, but on a cinematic scale. And that is what I saw from the trailers, and that is what you get from this show. I love Loki. I think it is very, very, very high up on my rankings as of right now. Depending on how this show decides to stick its landing, whether it does or not, that'll depend on how I rank this show. But as of right now, this is one of my favorite Marvel properties ever. So we are going to be talking a whole bunch of spoilers for this episode if you guys have not seen it yet. So don't watch this video if you don't want to know spoilers, because a lot happened. And honestly, this is just going to be however many minutes long of me gushing about this episode. So let's just get right into this. And before I forget to mention this, the music in the show. Just perfect. The music is incredible. So let's just get into this episode. It starts off right away. Loki wakes up in this void, essentially, is what it is. It is a void towards the end of time, but not quite at the end of time. It's like the last barrier before the end of time, essentially. And that's where everything goes that is pruned, including MOBIUS and all the different variants of Lokis. And the reason why there's so many Lokis is because Lokis are survivors. They survive after being pruned because they can survive in a world of chaos. And this world is one of chaos because there's a giant ass purple cloud named Alioth that annihilates everything in its path. And so that was just the first like 5 minutes of this episode. But before we get into the craziness of all of that, we get back to the TVA. We have RENSLAYER and we have Sylvie having their argument, their little back and forth at it. RENSLAYER is leading on to believe that she does not know who is actually behind the TVA. She's playing it in that way, and I honestly believe her. I honestly think that she genuinely wants to know what is going on behind the TVA, because she even admits essentially that she didn't know that those the timekeepers in that little vault room were fake. Essentially, she didn't know that they were robots, that somebody created them. So she's also curious at who's behind the curtain controlling all the things, which I have two possible theories, which I'll get into towards the end of this episode. But she also knows that pruning doesn't kill people. She knows that Loki is alive. She tells Sylvie that, and she essentially gives all the exposition, all the information we need for what this void essentially is. Like I said, it's at the end of time. It's where everything goes that is pruned, because they don't have the power to destroy all matter. It destroys a lot of matter, but it is sent to this Alioth thing that will eventually destroy it all. And we get more of the lies, or I guess the manipulation that the TVA, or at least the knowledge of the TVA, what they gave so far, like saying the timekeepers have this, they're tying up the end of the timeline, and the time has not fully written itself just yet, but at the end of time, they're trying to build a sort of utopia. That's what the timekeepers are, which I still think that is a part of the curtain, that is part of the lie of the TVA. But it was interesting and notable. So meanwhile, in this void of Lokis, we essentially have Loki, we have this Thor Loki, I'll call him Thorky, I guess, because he has Mjolnir, or a version of it. And then you have old Loki, young Loki, and Alligator Loki, which stole the episode, by the way. Every single time any character, including MOBIUS or any versions of Loki's, talk about this alligator and how it was pruned by eating the wrong cat on the wrong day or whatever it was, everything about this Alligator Loki, every shot of this Alligator Loki, I took like a screenshot of, because like, I love Alligator Loki. It's not my favorite character. This is my favorite thing Marvel has ever done. They made a variant of Loki. Mobius even says a point in this episode that he's considering, like, is this actually a Loki? Or maybe it's a long con and it's not a Loki and it's just trying to manipulate its way into becoming a Loki, or to be seemingly a Loki. But that would be the most Loki thing to do, to manipulate in that way. So maybe it is a Loki. Who knows? It's an alligator that eats off hands of other variant Lokis, which, that scene... and we get to learn more about old Loki and young Loki, and essentially how they created their own Nexus events, which is an interesting story for young Loki, which he just straight up says that he killed Thor, which was fantastic. You have Thorky, who just kind of was BSing his way of saying how he was, put in the TVA and pruned in the first place. And they have old Loki telling a tale of how instead of going up to Thanos and trying to stab him like Loki did in our main sacred timeline, he essentially made a duplicate of himself, and he essentially played dead, and he went off into the universe, drifted off into space, found a planet, and just lived his life until he was old. And then he became super lonely, and he wanted to make that connection with people. So as soon as he stepped off to find his brother, which he sorely missed, he was captured by the TVA, which is a heartbreaking story. And we get so much character arc with older Loki, played by Richard E. Grant, and he is the perfect casting for an older Loki. They could not have gotten a better cast member to play that role besides Tom Hiddleston himself in makeup. He just did such a phenomenal job, and his heroic moments at the end of the episode was so earned. But I love this story of how it's a tale as old as time for Lokis, I guess. It's the story that all Lokis have. They're always destined to be alone. They're always destined to survive, and they're always destined to lose because they are always put in these situations. Even this Loki who was able to get away and live his life past the point that he was supposed to die, he was able to do that. But as soon as he wanted to do more, as soon as he wanted to be outside of what you would generally think a Loki is, then he gets captured. And so back at the TVA, we have Renslayer and Sylvie still going at it until Sylvie decides that's everything that she's saying. She's saying some sort of like time void spacecraft or something like that is able to go through and go to the end of time to see who's actually behind it all, and is like a program that hasn't been finished yet or something like that. Is like a test model or something like that. And of course that was all BS. So Sylvie decides to take everything into her own hands and prune herself, which was a great moment in and of itself. And she is rescued from Alioth by, of course, we have MOBIUS showing up in this episode driving a pizza truck, which I don't know, Pixar reference? Maybe? I feel like this is yet another Pixar reference that is giving more, I guess, ideas that maybe Pixar is in the same universe as Marvel. Maybe it's a different variant world or a different alternate world of the Marvel universe, which would be kind of cool. And we also get just a phenomenal scene. While all that's happening, we get a phenomenal scene where as Loki's learning all the past of all these different other Lokis that is in his situation, this other giant group of, I guess, pirate Lokis, or what do they call them? Wolves. They're called the Wolves. And all these different Lokis, as narcissistic as they all are, there's this one leader, and they start a massive fight between all of these Lokis. Like I said, the alligator Loki eats the guy's hand off, and his scream in this moment is glorious. That is my purpose. My purpose is to watch Loki's hand be eaten by alligator Loki. That is my glorious purpose, and the show gave it to me. And just Loki just making that comment, that sly comment of this is a complete nightmare, and his face palm essentially watching all these different Lokis and how he essentially hates himself. He's learning to hate himself more because he sees how much of a narcissist he is, and sees how in every single version of himself, they're all doomed to have the same fate and to have the same narcissism, to have the same, I guess, troubled lives, and never able to get past that point of who Loki is. Even though Loki in the Sacred Timeline had an arc where he had a heroic death and a self-sacrifice essentially at the end of his life, that still wasn't Loki getting out of his own trappings, because he still lost. He still died. He didn't survive in that case. But to see this show really delving into the philosophy of Loki, because he even says in the last episode, I forgot how many times that I've died, he's lost track of it. That is the destiny of Loki. And so the fact that this show is really, I guess, fighting against that and giving Loki a new path that he wasn't destined for, something that he's fighting back against, is a very fascinating concept. And I think it's such a way that you can explore Loki's character that I would have never in a million years guessed that this show would do based on the trailers. Like, the trailers really did a great job at pitching this show, because this show is just wild in its concepts. Speaking of wild in its concepts, you have the blossoming romance between Loki and Sylvie, which again, this narcissistic romance of the first person that he's able to truly love is a version of himself, which is just perfect. But I absolutely adore their chemistry. Both Tom Hiddleston and Sophia Martino, I believe is her name, they are phenomenal together. In that scene where they're just kind of sitting on the hilltop looking off into the void, and Loki conjures himself a blanket and conjures her a blanket together, and they're like cuddling up against each other, and it's just like the way that they look at each other is so adorable in this scene, and their conversation about everything that's going on, them trying to figure out the situation, how to get out of this situation, with Sylvie thinking that she can possibly enchant it, Loki thinking he can kill this beast, this Alioth cloud thing, which is very, very funny. But the relationship and the banter between these two characters is so incredibly well written. This was one of my favorite scenes in the episode, and this episode had a scene where, again, an alligator Loki bit the hand off of even more narcissistic Loki than the Loki that we've seen so far in the MCU. Crazy. And so our Loki and Sylvie team essentially hatch up together a plan. Mobius is going to go off to the TVA and try to burn it all down, which is a wonderful moment. He better get a jet ski moment at the end of this series. Like, that's a must happen. Like, we have an alligator eating Loki's hands off, so we better get Owen Wilson on a jet ski. That needs to happen. But essentially we have Sylvie and Loki going off on their plan. Loki's going to distract this Cloud Alioth thing, and then Sylvie's going to try to enchant it, and you have old Loki walking off and deciding last minute, you know what, I'm going to help them, and he conjures up essentially an entire projection of Asgard, which kind of shows Loki and Sylvie that they are more powerful than they think, which kind of leads me to the theory that I have for the end of this episode. But they are able to distract this beast, this cloud, enough where old Loki sacrifices himself in a very sad scene. Like I said, his character arc in this episode was so great, and his very, very limited screen time. That's why you get an actor like Richard D. Grant to carry the weights of this moment of him being able to conjure up all these things, being able to have a heroic moment and a self-sacrifice at the end of this episode that meant so much. And I was genuinely sad. I wanted old Loki to get back to the main timeline and to do things with Loki and with Sylvie, but unfortunately that's not going to happen. But we have an epic moment where both Sylvie and Loki together learn how to enchant this creature, because they need both of them. Loki learns how to enchant, so he gets even more powers. He even has a moment where he has his dagger that lights on fire and he screams at it, which was phenomenal. I love Loki so much. His entire everything about him is just wonderful. But then they're able to enchant this thing, and then you get to see what's behind this, I guess, tunnel through time at the end of the timeline. And it honestly just looks like a giant mansion or a giant castle at the end of time that these timekeepers supposedly live in, or, which my theory is, that either Miss Minutes lives there or it's Loki and Sylvie. I think maybe that is how the show is going to end. I don't know if there's going to be a giant fight for time essentially at the end of this episode. I don't think it's going to be Kang or anything crazy like that, because I think the Marvel shows thus far has proved that these shows are self-contained to a point. WandaVision was probably the most open. Oh no, Falcon Winter Soldier was the most open to it, because obviously we have Captain America 4 being announced. With that whole thing with Sam Wilson becoming the new Captain America, that was a great grand thing that happened in the entirety of the MCU. WandaVision seemed fairly self-contained for the most part, although it sets up her character for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but it was contained in and of itself. It didn't set up a grand villain for the rest of the universe, essentially, for the rest of Phase 4, and so I don't believe that they're going to have anything crazy like Kang or Mephisto or whatever theories you guys may have. I honestly think this show might end with Loki and Sylvie being the ones behind it all, even though it kind of goes against their philosophy, or maybe just a version of Loki and Sylvie behind everything, a version of them that goes to this place and decides to stay there and to rule everything, to do that. But I don't believe that these characters in their character states right now are going to be like willing to run the TVA, because they find it so wrong, because Sylvie was ripped away from her family and her life from this. Same thing with Loki. He was ripped away from his life from this. Even though his life was going to be cut short, he still wasn't happy with that. And so all these different things, I don't believe that if it is a version of Loki that runs the sacred timeline, that runs the TVA, I can very much see that. That would very much be in line with this show. And with Marvel in general doing, like, the villains of the movie is an alternate version of the villain. Like in Iron Man, you have Iron Man and Ironmonger, you have Black Panther and Killmonger, you have the Black Widow movie, essentially. You have all these different things, these characters fighting different versions of themselves, and I think that's what the show is going to do. Or somehow Miss Minutes is behind it all, because we have Renslayer talking to Miss Minutes and her trying to dig and figure out what is actually at the end of time, gathering all those files behind it all, and maybe Miss Minutes actually has more to do than we previously thought. That is also another theory, but I don't know exactly how that would work out. I don't know the logistics of what that could be, and that'd be completely out of left field. So I think the more logical answer is that it's a version of Loki behind all of this, which would be a fun story, because this show is wacky and insane, and an alligator version of Loki bit off the narcissist version of Loki's hand in a glorious moment that I will never stop mentioning. So that is my review and just gushing about Loki episode 5. Again, this might be my favorite Marvel property in a long time. I guess Endgame is my favorite Marvel property when I did rank everything, but I honestly think this show is right up next. So I love this thing so far. I really hope it sticks a landing. One more episode to go, guys. One more video to go for this Loki series. I cannot wait to finish talking about this show. And comment down below all your thoughts, all your spoiler thoughts on this episode as well, as long as theories and everything you can possibly think of. I love this show. I want to hear how much you guys love it as well. Or if you don't like it, let me know what your thoughts on it and try to tell me that I'm wrong. Don't do that, because I don't think anybody is hating the show. So thanks everyone for watching this video. I will have a review and spoiler review for Black Widow coming very soon, because I have a lot of thoughts on that movie as well. I'm going to take some time to marinate on it as well. So that will be up on Thursday most likely. So thanks guys for watching, guys, and I hope to see you all in my next one.